Our lesson today is lesson number 5. Yeah, right there. Lesson number 5. The Plagues of Egypt is what we're going to be studying on this morning. Last Sunday was the oppression of slavery, and we kind of did the type and anti-type of slavery as being in the bondage of sin. And now the plagues of Egypt is what we're going to be looking at. And if we will look at the plagues of Egypt as a sign of conviction, let's look at it as being under conviction. The plagues, you know, that were put on the Egyptians. Some of the plagues came to the people there, to the Israelites, but then after a while they stopped on the Israelites, and the plagues then was concentrating on the Egyptians there. The plagues of Egypt, let's look at that. Let's look at the memory verse there. For godly sorrow worketh repentance to salvation, not to be repented of, but the sorrow of the world worketh death. You know, as we are living in sin, there comes a time when God is merciful upon us and decides that, hey, it's your time. It's your time. I know that happened to me back in July of 1963, and it had worked for a little while before that. And you know, I kind of brushed it off. And then one day in July, it was during the camp meeting up there at Happy Hill, conviction hit me. And I mean, that's when I went to the altar and got everything settled with God then. And you know, at the time, conviction is a miserable thing upon us. But it's a sweet, wonderful thing after it's all over with. You know, it's kind of like having a. I'm gonna bring a little illustration. It's kind of like having a toothache. You don't like that at the time, and you don't like going to the dentist. But then after it's all done, said and done, I should have done this so sooner. You know, and that's kind of a small illustration of it. But let's look at these plagues here as conviction. I'm going to read the junior emphasis. It's not in your quarterly there because you have the adult quarterly, but you look at the emphasis there. But the junior emphasis is, Pharaoh refuses to let Israel go. God begins to send plagues. Sin causes all kinds of pain, anguish, heartache, and even death. So, you know, that's what sin will bring to us. Sin is never pretty. Sin is something we want to get out of our lives just as quick as possible. Now, when you're in sin, you don't see that it's so bad. But when you become a Christian, you realize that sin is something that needs to be shunned away from, needs to be taken care of. And there's only one answer to sin, and that's the blood of Jesus Christ. Let's look at our readings here. Exodus 7 and 14, we're going to read 3 or 4 verses there. And the Lord said unto Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuses to let the people go. Get thee unto Pharaoh in the morning. Lo, he goeth out unto the water, and thou shalt stand by the river's brink against he come, and the rod which was turned to a serpent shalt thou take in thy hand. And thou shalt say unto him, The Lord God of the Hebrews hath sent me unto thee, saying, Let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. And behold, hitherto thou wouldest not hear. Thus saith the Lord, In this thou shalt know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will smite with the rod that is in my hand upon the waters which are in the river, and they shall be turned to blood. And the fish that is in the river shall die, and the river shall stink, and the Egyptians shall loath to drink of the water of the river. That word loath, I think I'm saying it right, means to unwillingly drink it, or reluctant to drink is what that word means there, because it was contaminated is what the deal is there, and it was not drinkable water. This was the first plague that was sent to Egypt. Moses warns Pharaoh. Moses and Aaron had showed Pharaoh the miracle of changing Aaron's rod into a serpent. Does that have any significance? Does that have any significance of what we're studying here and with salvation? You know, it's that old devil. It's that old serpent is what gets us in trouble, you know. And that was the first thing that came. Well, that's the first thing that comes in our life. Is the old serpent comes along. You know, why do I call the serpent Satan? It's because who came to Eve and enticed her? It was the old serpent, wasn't it? So, you know, I think it's all right to portray Satan as serpent, as the serpent. And, you know, as we are living our life, Satan is who we meet up with about the first thing, you know. He's always there ready to have us to do what's not right. You know, you take children. I think every one of us has had children before. You don't have to teach them to do wrong, do you? They learn that, don't they? If they could learn to do right like they learned to do wrong, wouldn't it be nice, you know? But no, that's not the way it goes. I mean, you know, the first thing, you know, you might accuse them of saying, "Honey, did you take a cookie out of the cookie jar? You know, Mama and Daddy told you not to take it." "No, I didn't take it." And they got crumbs on their lips, you know. You know, or they got a half a cookie in their hand, you know. "No, I didn't take it." "Well, what's that in your hand?" You know, they kind of grin at you, you know. And you know, that's the way we are when we try to pull the wool over Jesus' eyes. You know, there we are, just as guilty as we can be, you know. It's kind of like the cat that ate the canary, you know. Did you eat that canary? And he's got a bird feather hanging out of his mouth, you know. You know, and that's how guilty we are. Even more so than that, even, you know. But you know, the miracle of changing Aaron's rod into the serpent. There was that serpent. That's the first thing he met, was that serpent. The sorcerers had done the same with their rods. You know, they throw theirs down, you know, and theirs became snakes too, you know. Now, how did they do that? Well, I don't know how they done that, but that's what happened. But you know, however, there was a king snake out there, you know. However, the rod Aaron threw down swallowed up their rods, you know. And you know, I've always heard that if a snake is called a king snake, it is one that will attack other snakes. And so that's why I say this was a king snake here, you know. It swallowed up the other rods. Still, Pharaoh would not let Israel go. The children of Israel. It was because his heart was hardened. And you know, we as people growing up and coming to the age of accountability, our heart gets hardened. Now, you know, Jesus is there trying to persuade us to become a Christian. But you know, we harden our heart. We harden our heart against him. You know, Now, if you got saved the very first time Jesus talked to you, then good, I'm glad. But that wasn't the case with me. You know, he had to work on me. He had to work on me. And, you know, I resisted. And I think that's kind of the first reactions on most of us, is that we resist. Look what I have to give up to be a Christian. That's one thing that the devil will throw out to me. Look what I have to give up to become a Christian. My mom and dad's Christian, so, you know, I ought to be a Christian. You know, kind of hanging on to mama's skirt tail or coat tail of daddy's or something, but that's not the way it works. It doesn't work that way. Each one is responsible for theirself, you know. And you know, aren't you glad it's that way? Aren't you glad, really, after it's all said and done, aren't you glad it's that way? God knew what he was doing here. Still, Pharaoh would not let Israel go. It was because his heart was hard. Now the Lord would send 10 plagues on Egypt to make Pharaoh let Israel go. Pharaoh usually went to the river in the morning. Isn't that what you kind of got out of this? That go and meet him at the river there. God told Moses to meet him there. He would warn Pharaoh before sending a plague. And you know, God warns us before of the dangers of sin. He'll warn us. Don't go that way. And you know, what do? Kind of go that way. And you know, but God is merciful unto us. Moses told Pharaoh that he would strike the rod upon the river, and the water would turn to blood. What is the first thing, you know, after Satan entraps us into sin, and we become under conviction, what is the first thing that we kind of realize is going on in our life? We realized that the blood of Jesus Christ is what's going to save us from sin. Amen. You know, that's what we realize. We get a little picture of it here. That's the very first plague. Isn't that something? How that's the very first plague. We get a little bit of an insight to that blood right here. You know, when everything's blood, you know, everything's blood. And you know, that blood was not pretty. It was not nice. It was not what they wanted. You know, they go to the well or go to the river and get them a drink of water, and they pull up a cup and there it is, all blood. I can't drink that. I can't drink that. You know, and you know, it was a mess. And you know, this lasted for some time. I think it lasted 7 days, if I remember right. But anyway, old Satan gets us in the problem that we are. The first plague is of conviction is the blood. And we see the inside of Christ's blood will save us from sin. And the Lord spake, let's go into verse 19 there. And the Lord spake unto Moses, said unto Aaron, take thy rod and stretch out thy hand upon the waters of Egypt, upon their streams, upon the rivers, upon the ponds, and upon the pools of water, that they may become blood, and that there may be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. Even in the houses it turned to blood, didn't it? Isn't that what you're getting out of that? Yep. You know, if it was H2O, it became blood. You know? Any water seemed like it became blood. And Moses and Aaron did so as the Lord commanded. He lifted up the rod and smote the waters that were in the river and in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servant. And all of the waters that were in the river were turned to blood, and the fish that was in the river died, and the river stank. It had an odor, is what that's talking about. And the Egyptians could not drink of the water of the river, and there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. God sends the plague of the blood there. Pharaoh's heart was still hard. The Lord told Moses to tell Aaron to take the rod and strike the water of the river. They obeyed. Thank the Lord that Moses and Aaron obeyed. But you know, he had to have a servant. He had to have a vehicle to be able to do what God had told him to do, and that vehicle was Aaron and Moses there. And all the waters in the river, ponds, dishes of Egypt turned to blood. All the waters, you know, the stream, you know, when you, what's the difference between a stream and a river? A stream usually feeds a river. And usually by the time it gets down to the river, it's a little murky. But the stream is usually clear and usually nice water. Well, it wasn't. It was blood. It was blood. Wherever it came from, it was blood coming down, feeding into the rivers and the streams and the ponds. Ponds is usually a reservoir of water that may be running when rain comes, because most ponds have spillways, and when they get too full, or when they get full, they have a way that they can release the water out. And why do they have spillways? Well, if they don't have spillways, they'll go over the dam and wash the dam out, and it'll just be a river then again, or a stream again. So therefore, they're equipped with spillways there, but they became blood also. The dishes that was in the houses, and what happened? Well, fish can't live in blood, and so they died, and the river stank. Can you imagine dipping into a river like that has a bunch of dead animals in it? You know, there might have been crocodiles in the river too. I don't know, but you know, they probably died too. And you know, it was a mess around there, stinking mess. You know, I can remember when water used to get out up there around Rich Hill, and then it would be out maybe for 4 or 5 days or something. Then when it would go down, just the odor of that water stunk. It was stinking. It was a terrible smell. And I know we lived a little ways away from the river, and you know, if the wind was in the right direction, we'd kind of get some of that smell. But I often thought, man, I'm glad I don't live any closer to the river, because when times like this happens, it stinks. It's terrible. It don't smell good. But you know, these people had to put up with it because it was everywhere. It was everywhere. The Egyptians could not drink it. They dug in the ground for water. And this was the first plague. This was the first plague. Let's look at verse 22. And the magicians, magic people. It's hard for me to say that word and musicians. It's hard for me to distinguish. I mean, I know the difference between it, and it's hard to get my tongue so that I say the right thing. So that's why I say magic people of Egypt did so with their enchantments. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, neither did he hearken unto them, as the Lord had said. And Pharaoh turned and went into his house, neither did he set his heart to this also. And all the Egyptians digged around about the river of water to drink, for they could not drink of the water of the river. 7 days were fulfilled. After that, the Lord had smitten the river. 7 days, for 1 week. Can't you imagine that's 1 week? That's 7 days. was a long time. That was a long time. But you know, what happened then after that? You know, more plagues came. More plagues came. Here he was. Now think about this in conviction. 7 days this blood was on the land. You know, maybe some of us went 7 days in conviction, you know, and it was a hard time. It was a hard time for us. If we only knew then what we know now, we could have gave up and said, okay, Lord, take me, use me, do whatever you want to. I'm sorry for my sins. I want to be forgiven of my sins, you know. But you know, that usually don't happen to all of us that way. Me, I reneged on it. I reneged. I kept back. I held back. Maybe not reneged, but I held back. Dragged my feet, you know. You know, it wasn't the very first time that God spoke to me, that Jesus spoke to me, that I turned my heart and life over to it. But you know, the time that progressed from the first time to salvation was a trying time. It seemed like a long time. Even, you know, when I was younger, why, you know, time went fast, but time seemed like a whole lot slower than it is now. But anyway, at that time, it dragged, you know, because I was doing like Paul was, kicking against the pricks, you know, kicking against that goad that God was trying to goad me to go in the right direction, but I was being contrary. And that's what the Pharaoh was here, doing the same thing. The plagues came on. We do not go through all the plagues here, but the plagues are listed. If you'll look in your commentary there, the plagues are listed in where it says other plagues. And if we will look at it, it doesn't mention the blood because we studied that one. But then the next one was frogs. Frogs. What significance does frogs have? Well, you know, if you'll think back in Revelations, frogs was evil spirits, wasn't they? They were the evil spirits. And you know, when we're going through our conviction, that's one thing we have to face is the evil spirits of Satan. The evil spirits of Satan. You know, in Revelations, I think it mentions 3 of them, you know. But you know, the devil has all kinds of evil spirits. The evil spirits is always going to plague us until we turn our heart and life over to Jesus. Them evil spirits are going to plague us. Oh no, it's not the spirit world, but yet it is part of the spirit world that Satan has after us. He's always going to not give us what we want. We're always going to be wanting more. Yeah. We're always going to be wanting more. We're wanting him. I guess we look at him as, well, take this away. This is bothering us, and we'll even blame God. Well, we're not gods, but we'll blame God. God, why do you do this? Well, turn your heart and life over to me, and I'll make things right, But them evil spirits is always there to plague us. Let's look at the next one, lice and flies. You can kind of lump them together. Lice. Do you want lice? My wife comes home some days and she said one of the children had lice in her hair, and it just makes me itch, she says, She tries everything not to get them things, Lice is something we don't want, but they were terrible during the Egyptian plagues. Lice everywhere. Can you imagine how your hair would just, now lice in my hair would probably be a little easier to find than it would be in her hair, But, you don't want them.
No, sir.
They itch. They torment you. Flies. How many of you women want flies in your house when you're cooking? They're a torment, aren't they? They're nasty. Well, that's sin. That's sin. Nasty and a torment. Then they got the disease of the cattle. I can't pronounce that word there. Murun. It's a disease of cattle, and the cattle dies off. The cattle dies off, What? Another plague that Satan will send to us. I know there's at least two of us, two men in here that really like steaks, and when the cattle dies off, why, we don't have any steaks to eat, and I think there's some women that kind of like steaks too, So it's just not me and you, brother, that like steaks, but there's others that, but that's another thing that the devil torments. Boils. Can you think of anybody in the Bible that had boils? Job. He had to live with boils, and they were horrible. They were horrible from what did it say? From the crown of his head to the sole of his feet. I've heard of people, I've never had a boil that I know of, and I think if I had a boil, I would have known it. But I've heard of people having one boil, maybe two boils, and how terrible it is. Well, here Job, had to put up with a whole body full of boils, How many was it? I don't know, but there was a bunch of them from top to the bottom of him, boils. And that's something else that the devil sent to us. Aggravation, pain, aggravation. Let's look at that next one's hail. Hail. What does hail usually represent in the Bible? That's the truth coming to us, isn't it? Sometimes hail is considered truth coming to us. Here he is. Here God is working on us with truth. We have to know some truth before we can can become a Christian. We have to know some truth. And truth is something that we can either push off or we can accept it. God has given us that ability to either push off truth or to accept it. And this hail was with rain, was with thunder, and was also with fire. Sending it down, working on Pharaoh to try to get to his people loose from the bondage of what they were in. The bondage of slavery. I think, if I remember right, the plagues came to all of Egypt, and including the Israelites up to, and including 4, I believe, which would be blood, frogs, lice, and flies. But then I think when it came to the cattle, that didn't affect the Israelites. That one did not affect the Israelites. So if we was Israelites, we would still have our steaks, I think, Brother Bayless. So if I'm reading that right. But hail, another aggravation. Just think of what the Israelites escaped because they were the children of God. The disease of cattle, the boils, the hail, they escaped that. They knew what the truth was. Moses and the Israelites had told them what the truth was. They had passed it on down. from generation to generation what truth was. So they didn't have to go through that like the Egyptians did. But aggravations, keep prodding them. And then what was the number 8 was locusts. Locusts. What about locusts? Well, there was one man in the Bible that ate locusts and wild honey. John the Baptist, if you remember. You know, locusts can be a food in the Bible time. I don't know if I'd want to eat locusts, but, you know, that was something that was eligible to be eaten.
You have to put enough honey on it.
I guess so. You'd have to really sweeten it up with honey, wouldn't you? But locusts, you know, that was a food, you know. But it was an aggravation to the Egyptians. It was a big aggravation to the Egyptians. And you know, as they went through these plagues, each and every one of them was suffered by Pharaoh. Pharaoh suffered through each and every one of them. His bodyguards and his magicians, am I saying that right? Magicians, all suffered through all of this.
Right.
His cabinet members, the people that was prominent, the high class people that was in Egypt, that was under his rule, regular citizens is what I'm talking about, that might have had, was pretty well to do. They suffered on that. The blue collar people suffered. The poor people suffered. The homeless people all suffered. If you were an Egyptian, you suffered. And you know, that's the way we are when we're in sin. We might be a prominent person in society, but when conviction comes, it comes to everybody.
Yes.
No matter who you are. You know, just because you're rich don't mean you're going to be saved. You know, it seems like more than likely, if you're rich, you put a lot of stock in your riches, and you're not saved. You know, but that's rich has nothing to do with it. And you're not saved because you're poor and homeless.
That's right.
You know, the rich man and Lazarus. Let's look at that. Rich man and Lazarus. The rich man did not go to hell because he was rich. And Lazarus did not go to heaven because he was poor. That was not the reason why. You know, we can kind of conjure up in our mind that's the reason why. No, it's because Lazarus did what God wanted him to do. The rich man had no use for God. That's where it all works from. If you have no use for God, well, then God will have no use for you then when it comes judgment time. You know, and if we do what God tells us to do, and we follow Him and follow after His statutes, like it says in the Old Testament, we don't use that word very often, but commandments is about the same thing. If we will follow His commandments, as it is in the New Testament, as John writes, you know, if we'll follow His commandments, as Jesus said in John, and John recorded it, if we'll follow His commandments, then He will be our God, and He will take care of us. And that's the same way here. Through conviction, the devil will do nothing but aggravate us. It's an aggravation. Why don't people turn to God when the devil's aggravating them like that? They think they're having fun. They think they're having a good time. They think that, oh my, I'm having such a good time. On Saturday night, I'm having such a good time. And then they wake up on Sunday morning, wow, I'm never going to do that again. And guess what? Next Saturday night, they're right back out there doing what the devil wants them to do. And the next morning, I'll never do that again. And it's the same old thing over and over, because the devil has got you under his thumb. He's got you under his thumb. Following these plagues, the blood was one. And the plagues of the frogs, lice, flies, the disease of the cattle, boils, hail, and locusts. That's 8 of them. That's 8 of them right there. Pharaoh on the hail, Pharaoh says, I have sinned. I have sinned. He kind of woke up to the fact that, hey, I have sinned. The truth must have hit him. I have sinned. But you know, it wasn't but just a little bit, and no, I'm not going to let them go. He said that, well, the men could go. He's compromising a little bit. You know, and usually when there's compromise, the other side has to compromise too. But you know, not in this case. God had the very thing that, and he'd already told Moses and Aaron, this is what I want you to do. It's that or nothing, more or less. I want you to take the people out of there. That's not just men. That's men, women, children, all the Israelites. And I want the cattle to go with you. That was what God told him. Well, Pharaoh thinks he can get a compromise. Well, I'll let the men go, but the children and the women stay back here and the cattle stay back here. What does Moses say? No deal. And you know, that's what we got to do. The devil is going to come to us and want us to compromise also. And you know, God has given us a law of no compromise.
That's right.
No compromise. You compromise, the devil's got you. He's same as got you when you compromise. But Moses and Aaron says, no deal. No deal. If that's what you want to do, then there's more coming. There's more coming. The magic people were able to imitate the first few, but after that they could not. There was a greater power than they had. They said, this is the finger of God. This is the finger of God. They recognized, Pharaoh, we're dealing with more than what we can do.
Sure.
And you know, God is more than what we can do. God is the only answer to sin. Jesus is the answer to sin. They said, this is the finger of God. With the fourth plague, the flies, God began to send the plagues only upon the Egyptians. Sometimes Pharaoh would promise to let Israel go. Then he would not do it. He says, stay in the land and make your sacrifices, or let only the men go, or leave your animals at home here. However, the Lord had said all the people and all that they had must leave Egypt and go 3 days' journey into the wilderness. Nothing else would do. We must not compromise with sin. And that is a point that I want to get across to you as Christians. Never compromise with Satan. Never debate Satan. What did Jesus say in the temptation? You know, if we was out there at the pageant last night, we would have probably heard it. You know, he had the three trials in the wilderness that's recorded. And what does he say? Get thee behind me. Get out of here, Satan. That's the best thing to do. Don't try and debate Satan. Don't try and debate him. Get him out of there.
That's right.
Get him out of there just as quick as you can. Nothing else would do. They must not compromise with sin. When we become disciples of the Lord, we must leave all of sin and give up all of ourselves and all that we have to Him. Isn't that pretty much everything? Give up ourselves, all that we have, and everything that belongs to Him. Nothing less. will ever do.
No.
Nothing less. You know, and I've heard. I know you've heard this time and time again. Brother Bayless bringing out that giving up all, but not giving up your will to yourself, is a obstruction, and giving up the right to yourself. You know, I've brought that out many times because it opened my eyes up to the fact that what really giving up everything is.
Right.
And that's even giving up the right to yourself. Sometimes Pharaoh would start to repent. He said, I have sinned, forgive me. Then he'd turn back to his sins again. Let's run short here. Let's look at 10 and 21. And the Lord said unto Moses, stretch out thy hand toward heaven, and there shall be darkness over the land of Egypt, even darkness which may be felt. How dark is that? How dark is that? I have been in a cave before, and maybe you all have too, but I have been in a cave, and they have turned the lights out down in that old hole, and turned the lights out, and you can't see nothing. You can put your hand this close and you cannot see your hand at all. I've tried it before. I've always been told that is very dark down in a cave, and it's true. It's very, very dark. But you know, it wasn't darkness that you could feel. That was the hand of God.
Amen.
That was the hand of God. And you know, we have to be brought to a place like this that we look at ourselves and say, I'm dark. I'm dark. I need God. You know, God said, let there be light, and there was light. You know, that darkness that was all over was probably a darkness kind of like this, or kind of like the cave, or whatever you might say. And when God says, let there be light, darkness has to expel.
Sure.
It has to be gone, because God said it. And Moses stretched forth his hand toward heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. Boy, that was a long 3 days. You know, I was in that cave maybe 3 minutes at the most. And I mean, it was dark. You couldn't tell if people was moving around you, you know, because there was a bunch of us in there. And you couldn't tell whether that person is still here, or whether they moved back here, or whether they moved up here. You know, you can't see them until they'd speak, and then you kind of know where they were at. But, you know, if they were quiet, you didn't know where they were at. They saw not one another, neither rose any from his place for 3 days, but all the children of Israel had light in their dwelling. Wasn't that a miracle? How so dark here, and yet over here where the children of Israel was, there's light. Sinners over here is in such gross darkness. Christians over here is in wonderful, beautiful light. Wonderful, beautiful light. You know, we like to be able to see what we're doing. You know, if you're doing something you can't see, you know, if I'm working on my glasses here, and of course I'm very nearsighted, I have to take my glasses off and put the little screws in and one thing. I want to be able to see. And if I work on somebody else's glasses, you'd think I'd leave my glasses on. But I'm so nearsighted that I can see better without glasses close. Now, back there where Brother Bayless is at, I just kind of see an image, and I wouldn't even be able to know who it was, because I can't see the features of his face, you know, because I'm so nearsighted. But I take my glasses off because I want to see. I want to be able to see how to do it. And you know, that's the way we are as Christians. We want to be able to see. We don't want to do things in darkness. We don't want to do things behind the scenes. We don't want to, I'm talking about, a lot of times there's work behind the scenes. But what I'm talking about is I want to be able to see, and I want to be able to do and not do things sneaky. is what I'm talking about. I want to be able to do God's work. And darkness was one of the plagues. That was number 9. Darkness take and that's when Pharaoh says, take the little ones, but leave the cattle. How do you sacrifice? How do you go out and make sacrifices if you can't take cattle with you? You know, the devil's always got some kind of a trick up his sleeve. He's always got a trick up his sleeve. You know, go ahead and take them. Maybe they won't remember that they have to have cattle to go sacrifice. Is that what he was thinking about? You know, I mean, the devil does such ignorant things. You know, the plagues of darkness. The ninth plague came as Moses stretched forth his hand toward heaven. Darkness came in all the land of Egypt. It was darker than we'd ever seen. It was thick darkness, even darkness which may be felt. For 3 days it was dark. The Egyptians could not see to move. However, the children of Israel had light. And that is a wonderful thing right there. Pharaoh said the children must go if they left their animals at home. Moses would not agree. There again, Moses would not compromise with the devil. And if you don't get anything out of the lesson other than this, do not compromise with the devil. It never pays. Pharaoh was angry. The devil's going to be angry. Let him get angry. Let him get mad. We got a higher power. We have a higher power. He said he never wanted to see Moses' face again. Moses told him he would not see it. When the next plague comes, he will want the people to go. So next Sunday, I think we're going to be studying on that one. There's a song, and I want to read a verse here, or a part of the saying here, and you all might have heard it. My iniquities so vast have been blotted out at last. My sins are all covered by the blood. I love that song. Paula was playing it this morning. My iniquity so vast. I was only 8 years old, and you think, well, how much iniquities did you have at 8 years old? It was black, it was sin, and that's all that mattered. Sin is vast. Iniquities have been blotted out at last. My sins are all covered by the blood, and thank God for that. I'm going to leave that with you there. And next Sunday, our lesson is going to be the Passover. And that'll be the plague number 10. That'll be the probably including plague number 10. So I'm going to leave that with you there then.